It's on, yeah, it's on. Good evening, everyone. We're gonna wait a few minutes because they said there's a big exhibition, ATM exhibition, which is about tourism in near Sheikh Zayed Road. So the traffic is very, very awful there. So I suggest if you go to different galleries to visit different places until once the crowd come, our audience come here, and I think we're expecting minimum around 67 people minimum. And the last minute people will come here. But the traffic is very bad. That's what they told me. Just to, I recommend that you go around to see the museum. And if you finish this museum, we have two more museums in the back. If you like weapons, we have old weapons there. The ugliest guns we have there. Yo, inshallah. And also we're gonna have old manuscripts. عندنا متحف المخطوطات ومتحف الأسلحة القديمة ومتحف معبد الحضارات. فمخطوطات اللي هي تاريخية كلها. بنشوفه اما تشوفه حين او بعدين بس ننتظر شوي الضيوف لما يحضرون. الحين بنروح للغرف القاعات مختلفه.
Check. Hey. Hello. Testing. Hey. Check. Hey.
Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. Hello. 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 Very good. Very good. Hello. Hello. Check. Check.
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. Good evening, everyone. Let's please have a seat so we can start. Please have a seat. Take your seats anywhere. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished guests, our colleagues from the media, our old friends, new friends, Mohammed bin Zayed University of Humanity, Yeshiva University, Rebel University, Department of Education of Jewish Studies, and all of you, old colleagues, thank you very much for being here with us today. Today is our first academic dialogue, between both nations, between our brothers from the Jewish people and also between the Arabs. We have also conducted something like this similar, but was not academic. It was a dialogue. It was like in 2020, December 6th. It was the first dialogue between the Israelis and the Emiratis, the first dialogue between the Jewish people and the Muslims, and the first dialogue between Arabs and the Jews. We had created that dialogue in the area of history, in the area of religion, kinship. It was very beautiful, successful dialogue. However, academically, professionally, to do it properly, I think with your presence, with our dear speakers and everyone, I think it will take us to the next level. And this will be the first from the what's going to come in the future, the series of many events. I would like to recite a verse from the Quran. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples of tribe and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. He said may know one another, not to fight one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous you. Indeed, God is knowing all. So the importance of this event for us, as we can say, it's an intellectual dialogue. And here we are putting, from both sides, the different, unfortunately, prevailing, narrow-minded, extremist, narratives which happen in the region. Here we're here just to learn more about one another. We are here to create a platform for a dialogue, that can bring us together. Then we are reviving the history through such dialogue in a way that, showing the people that, when we were together for centuries ago, especially in the Middle Ages, I think we were living the best life together. The Middle East was the shrine of values, the shrine of principles, the shrine of everything else. Here we're trying to establish the first platforms. And we have with our intellectual speakers and colleagues, to make sure that, we revive the beautiful days of that time, and also to establish and encourage a new language in the Middle East. A new language in the Middle East and the North African language region, the language of, of how can we change the game from zero-sum game to win-win game for the better future for all of us. That's our main goal here. So here I would like to invite my dearest friend, Flair Hassan, Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, to say a few words, and we are very honored that she is joining us. And after that, we're going to start the program. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Whew. It's so wonderful to be back here. It's my second home. My happy place is Dubai. I come to relax from the stresses of the rest of the Middle East. And it's particularly wonderful to be in the Crossroads Civilization Museum with my great friend Ahmed Obeid al-Mansouri. And it was indeed in 2020 when we had the first ever cultural event between Emiratis and Israelis, between Jews and Muslims in this very museum. We called it rebuilding the tent of Abraham. And that's exactly the feeling that we've had over the last few years with these wonderful opportunity that have been given to us with the Abraham Accords. So there's a few friends here combining for this event this evening. My very dear friends at the Yeshiva University, and Stu Halpern, who I met last week in Jerusalem, and he said, you have to come for this event. And I said, okay, and here I am. Yeshiva University is really the university of the leading Jewish philosophical thought with the most exciting Jewish philosophers of today. And to have them here with my friend Ahmed Obeid al-Mansouri is a real treat. I just want to say a couple of things about this place and about Ahmed specifically. For 15 years, Ahmed, who's very modest and doesn't say half of what he does, has been collecting Jewish artifacts from the region, from all over the region. And with that, a very important narrative, and that is that Jews are from this region, and we are here to rebuild that kinship that we had for thousands of years, for hundreds and thousands of years. And so with that, he was really the pioneer in that narrative in this region. And if that wasn't enough, Ahmed is the first person in the region to open an exhibition for the Holocaust right here in this museum, the first ever in the Arab world. And with that, he's become a pioneer and a leader of building the bridges between Muslims and Jews. And so first of all, I want to recognize the important work that Ahmed does. Last year, I was privileged to march with him from Auschwitz to Birkenau in the March of the Living, the first ever Emirati to do that. I was very privileged to be able to do that with Ahmed. And so I feel that we have real partners here in the region for everything that we want to do. And one last thing, you know, it's interesting when you read about building bridges and when you read about, of course, the Rambam, and when you read about Ibn Rushd, which you're going to be speaking about tonight, you see two very, very similar men. Two men who were ahead of their time and both got chastised from their own communities, but two men who were bridge builders. They made the bridge between Western philosophy and between Abrahamic philosophy. And those are the bridge builders that we need today more than ever. And I'm privileged to be a friend of the Yeshiva University that is doing that bridge building, and of course the one and only Ahmed Obeid al-Mansouri with this museum. So I hope everybody has a wonderful conference, and it's really an honor to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Flair, for your kind words. I hope I deserve them. So now I would like, thanks a lot. Now I would like to ask our dear Rabbi, Stuart, help us to come here and to give a few words on behalf of the Yeshiva University. Please, my dear Rabbi, come.
On behalf of Yeshiva University, I want to express my gratitude to our partners at the Mohammed bin Zayed University of the Humanities, and of course His Excellency for welcoming us with open arms. So Jews across the globe during these past few weeks have been counting what we call Sfirat HaOmer, a count from Pesach, Passover, the time of our national liberation, our redemption, towards Shavuot, the holiday of revelation. And the question is asked, why do we count these 49 days up? We start from 1 and we go to 49, 7 weeks. We could just as easily count down from 49 to 1. The answer is given that by counting up, we are acknowledging the past while looking towards the future. We are acknowledging that every day we build on the day that has come before us. And being here tonight and on this historic occasion is an opportunity to acknowledge those who have built the days that have come before us and those who are paving the way towards a brighter future. We are extremely grateful for the days ahead as we all increase what has been done before and share in a joint and strengthened friendship and partnership in the future. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you very much, dear Rabbi Stuart, for your introduction. And I would like to take the opportunity to also to apologize. I'm apologizing for we have started late a little bit today. And hopefully, you know, we'll not run of town, we'll not stay longer than what we're supposed to, just maybe a little bit. So we're going to start the first session. The first session is about philosophical interactions. Maimunat and the Parable of the Sultan Palace by Dr. Daniel Reinhold. Please, Dr. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you. There's a blessing that Jews recite, and it can be explained as a way of acknowledging the miracle of the present moment. We traditionally say it for, among other things, doing something for the first time. So as I stand here in Dubai for the first time, representing the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies in Dubai for the first time, it seems only right to express thanks for the privilege of having arrived at this moment. And so I say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Lord our God, who's given us life, sustained us, and allowed us to arrive at this moment in time. To put things a bit more colloquially, I'd like to thank the Crossroads of Civilizations Museum, in particular His Excellency Ahmed Al-Mansouri, for hosting us here as partners at this symposium with the Mohammed bin Zayed University for Humanities. I'll briefly introduce myself. As you've heard, my name's Daniel Reinhold. I'm the Dr. Mordechai Dean Katz, Dean of the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies, and we're a small but significant and historic school at Yeshiva University. We offer graduate degrees in Jewish studies for over 90 years now, actually. And on the one hand, we're a school that's deeply rooted in the past. We teach texts that go all the way back to biblical times, but we cover the whole of Jewish history and actually look to and innovate for the future. We've just reached out and we're building a new program for the first time with Christian students, both in the United States and in South Korea. And of course, here today, we take the first steps in collaborating with our Muslim brothers, joining with you here in the United Arab Emirates for this wonderful symposium. So I know I speak on behalf of Yeshiva University in general, and the Bernard Revel Graduate School in particular, when I say how exciting and frankly quite moving it is to be here with you today in friendship, to look together at elements of our shared history, a shared history that has at times seen some of the great peaks of the Jewish story emerging in an Islamic context, as will be reflected in much of what you hear this evening. And it's probably no exaggeration to say that the foremost representative in Jewish history of the flowering of Jewish-Muslim engagement is somebody you've heard already mentioned, Moses Maimonides, or Rambam. He lived between 1138 and 1204, and he spent his life absorbing from the very best in Islamic civilization to produce two of the most significant works in the Jewish literary canon, the Mishneh Torah, Code of Jewish Law, to this day remains the most exhaustive code of Jewish law. And of course, the Guide of the Perplexed, originally, of course, if you'll excuse my pronunciation, the Dalalat al-Ha'irin. And what I'd like to do briefly is focus on a very famous parable that Maimonides presents toward the very end of that work, the Guide. It's called the Parable of the Sultan's Palace. And it's a very interesting parable, both because of what's actually in it, what it says, the content, but also because it maybe tells us something very interesting about Maimonides' own life, sort of between the lines. So what I'm going to do is I'll give you a very brief potted biography of Maimonides. I'll then present the parable to you with some commentary, and then we'll conclude with what I find to be a fascinating but speculative suggestion by a very well-known scholar of medieval Islamic and Jewish philosophy, Stephen Harvey, regarding what might be a very personal side to this famous parable. So, to begin with, Maimonides was born in Cordoba, the capital of Andalusia, called the most beautiful jewel in Al-Andalus by Arab writers of the day. Maimonides actually often spoke of things being done in Dana, or as we might say, kind of at our place, more colloquially, referring, therefore, to his heritage, his cultural heritage. And he'd use that term even when he'd moved out. He'd say Al-Andalus, even though he was no longer living there. So he felt a real debt culturally to what he'd learned and studied and absorbed while living there under Muslim rule, even when he wasn't there. You may or may not notice, I'm actually English. I don't come from America. And I still say I'm English and talk about things you do at home, meaning England, not New York. And Maimonides was kind of doing the same thing when he would speak of being at our place, Al-Andalus. But the most significant years of his life, from age 28 onwards, were spent in Egypt. He landed in Alexandria in 1166, but very soon moved to Fustat, to Old Cairo, which was a focal point of culture and commerce. When he lived there, he found an even more accommodating environment. He lived there for the last 38 years of his life, in a community that numbered about 3,600 Jews, rabbinic Jews. It would be 4,000, including Karaites. The rabbinic Jews were split between two communities, two synagogues. Allegedly, Maimonides didn't go to either of them. There's a famous old Jewish joke about the one Jew who lives in the town and it's got two synagogues. Why has it got two? Because that's the one I don't go to. Plus ça change. So Maimonides appeared to actually pray in kind of study halls, or batei midrash as we'd call them. So yeah, nothing changes. But apart from Jewish life, Maimonides' arrival coincided with the end of the Fatimid dynasty and the beginning of the rule of the Ayyubids. And most significantly at that point, under Saladin, when he came into power just 5 years after Maimonides arrived in Egypt, Maimonides' patron, Al-Qadi al-Fadil, became Saladin's chief administrator, chief of staff, you might say. So much of Maimonides' productive life was spent very close to the seat of power, indeed, in the Sultan's palace. And we know quite a lot about his life administering to the Sultan because we have a letter that he wrote in his own lifetime. The Guide of the Perplexed was being translated. It was written in Judeo-Arabic, and it was being translated into Hebrew by Samuel ibn Tibbon. And Ibn Tibbon was traveling to Egypt and wanted to visit Maimonides to discuss the translation. So he writes a letter, and we have Maimonides' reply. And Maimonides' reply would have been very disappointing to Maimonides and Ibn Tibbon, because he basically says, I have no time to see you. But it's a great gift to us scholars because it gives us a really vivid and fascinating picture of Maimonides' daily life. So there's a letter he wrote. I don't know if there's a kind of, you've got the letter to put up there and people can follow along. If you do, then it might appear there. If it doesn't, here's what he wrote. I quote. He says, "Now God knows that in order to write this to you, I've escaped to a secluded spot where people would not think to find me, sometimes leaning for support against the wall, sometimes lying down on account of my excessive weakness, for I've grown old and feeble." He wrote this, by the way, it's dated in terms of our calendar, September 1199. Right? So he's only got 5 years left to live, so he's already elderly. And he goes on, "With respect to your wish to come here, I cannot but say how greatly your visit would delight me. for I truly long to commune with you and would anticipate our meeting with even greater joy than you. Yet I must advise you, do not expect to be able to confer with me on any scientific subject for even 1 hour, either by day or by night, for the following is my daily occupation. Right? So he says, you're not going to get any time with me day or night because this is my day. And he goes on to tell us his day. Here we go. I reside at Misra Fustat, and the Sultan resides at Kahia, Cairo. These two places are, I'll translate here, about 1.5 miles distance from each other. My duties, he tells us, to the Sultan are very heavy. I'm obliged to visit him every day, early in the morning, and when he or any of his children or any of the people in his harem are indisposed. I dare not quit Cairo, but must stay during the greater part of the day in the palace. It also frequently happens that 1 or 2 of the royal officers fall sick and I must attend to their healing. As a rule, I go to Cairo very early in the day, and even if nothing unusual happens, I do not return to Fustat until the afternoon. Right? So you're thinking, not too bad, early morning, get home in the afternoon, and yeah, he's got to administer to the palace, but he goes on, gets home early afternoon, then I'm almost dying with hunger. I find the antechamber filled with people, both Jews and Gentiles, nobles and common people, judges and bailiffs, friends and foes, a mixed multitude, who await the time of my return. Imagine you get home, lines of people round the house waiting for you. He continued, I dismount from my animal, wash my hands, go forth to my patients, and entreat them to bear with me while I partake of some slight refreshment, the only meal I take in 24 hours. Then I attend to my patients, write prescriptions and directions for their ailments. Patients go in and out until nightfall, sometimes, I solemnly assure you, until 2 hours or more in the night. When night falls, I'm so exhausted, I can scarcely speak. He goes on, for the sake of time, I won't give you the details of his weekends. Suffice to say, they're not much better. So he says, when you finish your translation, I beg you will come with me, but not with any hope of delivering any advantage from your visit, for my time, as I have shown you, is excessively occupied. It would be fair to say Maimonides was a very busy man. So, that's kind of the biographical stuff. At the end of the guide, right at the end, the last 3 chapters, in chapter 51 of part 3, he gives us this famous parable of the Sultan's palace. And he talks about various people at various distances from the palace. Right? And I've got the kind of the text, and I won't read it all, but just very briefly, he talks about the ruler in his palace. The subjects are partly in and partly out of the city. Those who are in the city, some have their backs to the palace, right? Some are at least turned towards it, trying to find it, right? Others get into the outer part of the palace. Some get right into the inner chamber. So he gives us what ultimately turn out to be 7 different levels in the parable. And he compares them to 7 different levels of closeness to God, right? So the people outside with their backs turned, he says they know nothing. They're almost like animals in terms of having no intellect, no knowledge whatsoever. And he goes through the various levels until he gets to the higher levels, so those who have entered the palace and walk around the antechambers. And he says those are people who have plunged into speculation concerning the fundamental principles of religion, right? They've done some philosophy. For Maimonides, they're higher than just the rabbis who have done the legal stuff. So the rabbis do the Talmud and the law, but it's only if you've studied philosophical principles that you reach the next level. I used to tease my rabbinic friends that I have a philosophy degree, so I'm doing better than them. But closer than that, some get to the very inner part of the Sultan's habitation, and he speaks of them as having achieved demonstration, philosophical proof, to the extent that's possible of everything that may be demonstrated. Right? These are people who are even closer. The greater your philosophical knowledge, the closer you come. But finally, he speaks of people who reach the highest level. Right? So for Maimonides, the people who are right there with the Sultan reach the highest level, and they're compared to, in the parable, they stand for the ultimate level of prophets who, as he says, turn wholly towards God, renounce what is other than he, and direct all the acts of their intellect to an examination of beings with a view to drawing from them proof with regard to God and to know what is possible to know of God. So the ultimate level for Maimonides, the people who he compares to those in the inner part of the Sultan's palace, are those whose minds are solely, continually thinking about God and ultimately ignoring everything else. And he says only 4 human beings actually achieved that, which are the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. They, according to Maimonides, could administer to the needs of the people whilst their minds were actually concentrating entirely on God. So for Maimonides, the highest level is to almost be able to bifurcate yourself, split yourself in two. Your body's doing taxes, right? But your mind's on God. That's the very highest level. But that's superhuman, ultimately impossible for most, if not all, human beings. And therefore, what Maimonides says, which is maybe more a prescription for those who are not at the level of those 4 individuals, are people who can find a bit of time for solitude. Maimonides says every excellent person stays frequently in isolation and does not meet anyone unless it's necessary. He also speaks of maximize the use of your time when, and again, quote from the guide, he says, when you're alone with yourself, no one else is there, while you lie awake on your bed, you should take great care during these precious times not to set your thought to work on anything other than the intellectual worship consisting in nearness to God and being in his presence. So basically, Maimonides is saying, look, I get home, right, go to bed. That's the time I get, right? And at that time, I'm on my own. So I use that time to really think intellectually, to the extent possible, about God. And you can understand why, given the letter. But you do wonder, how could a Maimonides become a Maimonides if the only time he had to devote to becoming Maimonides, indeed writing his books, is when he's exhausted in bed at night? So the question is, given the life he led, which was very practical, constantly, a medic, a physician, then going home, consulting constantly with his community. And yet, his recommendation, what should we do with our lives? Not that, we shouldn't actually deal with people, we should be thinking about God. How on earth did he find time to even write the Guide of the Perplexed? So here's the final little speculative bit, and I think it's very relevant to what's going on here this evening. Because if we return to the day job, right, he was the personal physician to both Al-Qadi al-Fadil, who, as we mentioned, effectively the Sultan's chief of staff, and to Saladin's son, Al-Afdal, who would take over as Sultan actually in 1198. We know both of those individuals commissioned books from Maimonides. We know they were patrons of the arts. Al-Fadil in particular was a bibliophile. He was a book lover. He built an enormous royal library. Maimonides dedicates one of his medical works to Al-Fadil. Right? It's called The Treatise on Poisons and Their Antidotes. And he thanks Al-Fadil for, I quote, the building of academies and thus increasing the number of men of knowledge and inquiry. So, you know, this was Maimonides' boss. Maimonides' patron, somebody who loved books and built a library. So Stephen Harvey suggests the following interesting speculation. Might it actually be that Maimonides found time to worship intellectually, and indeed maybe to write and to study, when he was actually in the Sultan's palace? Right? It's a lovely parable, but maybe it's got a double meaning. Maybe he's talking about himself. When was he with the Sultan? As in, when was he with God? Maybe literally when he was in the Sultan's palace, facilitated by Al-Fadil, find time and space among the book collections in the library and maximize those moments between administering to the royal court. And at that point, in his, if you like, downtime in the Sultan's palace, when he speaks to Ibn Tibbon of being daily with the Sultan, does it have a double meaning? Is he literally with the Sultan on a daily basis? And then, when he has the opportunity in the quiet of the inner habitation, is that also when he's with the Sultan, contemplating God? And if so, even if not, to conclude with the very theme of tonight, was there ever a greater example of Jewish-Muslim engagement than the fact that the foremost exponent of Jewish thought, Moses Maimonides, physician to the Sultan, was able to engage in the highest forms of worship right there and then in the Sultan's palace? Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Danielle Reinhold, Dean of Yeshiva University at Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies, for the insightful background and also opening with the first lecture. Now I would like to ask Dr. Ibrahim Burshashin from Mohammed bin Zayed University of Humanity to talk on the relationship between Ibn Rushd and Ibn Maymuna. Please, تفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنا مسرور جدا بوجودي بينكم، وسرور يتضاعف أنني أمثل مع صديقي الدكتور حيدر جامعة محمد بن زايد للعلوم الإنسانية التي تحتفي بتفاعل الفلسفة ومشاركة الصداقة. فبرامج الجامعة هي كلها تصب في هذا المجال الذي هو مجال الصداقة والتفاعل الفلسفي. هذه الجلسة التي نجلسها جميعا هي ليست جلسة فلسفية، هي ربما تكون جلسة أدبية وشعرية أكثر من أن تكون جلسة فلسفية، ولكن اعذروني على بعض الدسامة التي قد أتحدث بها في هذا الموضوع الجميل والذي يعطينا أكثر من دلالة في الوقت الحاضر، وهو لقاء ابن ميمون مع ابن رشد. وفي الحقيقة هو لقاء الثقافة اليهودية مع الثقافة الإسلامية، وهذا الإنتاج الذي تمخض عن هذا اللقاء. فاليهود كانوا مغرمين ومشغوفين بالثقافة الإسلامية، وهذا الغرام والشغف أنتج من بين ما أنتج دلالة الحائرين لابن ميمون. وهناك كتاب فرائد القلوب لابن بقودة أيضا، وهو من الكتب التي تفاعل فيها ابن بقودة مع إحياء علوم الدين للغزالي. ابن رشد كان محبوبا عند اليهود وحظي بمكانة متميزة عندهم. يكفي أن نقف عند بعض الأوصاف التي كان اليهود يصفون بها ابن رشد، فيصفوه بالحكيم الفيلسوف والحكيم الكبير ورأس المفسرين والفيلسوف الإلهي الحكيم والقاضي الأوحد والقاضي الكامل والفقيه المبجل المتمكن الأوحد والحكيم الجامع والقاضي الإلهي. هذه كلها أوصاف خلعها اليهود وأضفوها على ابن رشد. ووصفت كتبه، وصف اليهود كتب ابن رشد، وهنا يعني أعتمد على أحد الكتب المهمة جدا وهو ابن رشد والفكر العبري الوسيط، فعل الثقافة العربية الإسلامية في الفكر العبري اليهودي، أن كتب ابن رشد وصفت بكبر الفائدة والوضوح والبيان وحسن الانتقاء ونبالة المعارف وعمقها، وكذا بجدتها وتجديدها في الفكر اليهودي. بدأت علاقة ابن رشد، سأعطي فكرة أولية عن علاقة ابن رشد باليهود، ثم أقف عند بعض اللحظات الدالة على علاقته بابن ميمون. الموضوع فيه قضايا أراها دسمة على هذا اللقاء وسأتجاوزها. أخبرتني لجنة تنظيمية أن الموضوع قد ترجم إلى اللغة الإنجليزية وهناك نسخة عربية ممكن أن تقرأ في غير هذا الفضاء. بدأت حلقة طبيعة الحال عندما نتحدث عن ابن رشد كما تعلمون نتحدث عن الأندلس. الأندلس هو ذلك الفضاء المبهج العلمي والأدبي والثقافي الذي تلاقحت فيه الثقافات كلها يهودية ومسيحية وعربية. فعلاقة ابن رشد باليهود بدأت في حلقة العلم، هو كان يتعلم ويعلم أيضا. كما ترجع إلى مدينة أليسانا في الأندلس التي كان يسكنها اليهود والتي كانت علاقة ابن رشد بها معروفة جدا. ثم هناك نقطة مهمة أيضا وهي أن اليهود عملوا على ترجمة كتب ابن رشد إلى اللغة العبرية، ففي جميع القرن الثالث عشر والنصف الأول من القرن الرابع عشر كان هناك حركة ترجمة كبيرة لابن رشد إلى العبرية، ويرجع الفضل إلى أسرة يهودية وهي أسرة التيبون التي ذكرها زميلي السابق، ذات الأصول الأندلسية والتي عملت على ترجمة ابن رشد. فموسى ابن تيبون منح اليهود ترجمة كاملة تقريبا لأعمال ابن رشد الفلسفية وبعض مؤلفاته الطبية. هو ابن ميمون يصرح أنه قرأ جميع كتب ابن رشد الفلسفية إلا كتاب الحس والمحسوس لم يصل إليه في ترجمة عربية. وهناك يعني شروحات كثيرة لمؤلفات ابن رشد إلى العبرية. طبعا هناك نقطة أيضا أساسية وهي أن اليهود كانوا يبنون فكرهم اليهودي بناء متينا وقويا، وهذا هو الذي يفسر هذا الانفتاح الكبير على الثقافة الفلسفية. وكتاب دلالة الحائرين من الكتب التي هي مهمة في هذا المجال. بالنسبة لعلاقة ابن رشد بابن ميمون، بالمناسبة ابن ميمون أوصى طلبته وتلامذته بقراءة أرسطو، ولكن أن يقرأوه دائما بشروح ابن رشد. موسى بن ميمون يعتبره اليهود موسى الثاني بفعل التأثير الكبير الذي تركه في الطوائف اليهودية خلال التاريخ بواسطة كتابه دلالة الحائرين الذي قال فيه أحد مؤرخي الفلسفة: ليس هناك كتاب عبري بعد الكتاب المقدس وصحف التلمود أثر أثرا عميقا في حياة اليهود مثل كتاب دلالة الحائرين، لأن أنصار موسى في حياته وبعد مماته كانوا يقرؤونه في الكنائس ويدرسونه في المعابد، وأصبح هذا الكتاب دلالة الحائرين عماد الاسترشاد، وتداولته أيدي المعارضين أيضا، حتى الذين عارضوه كانوا يتداولونه ليبينوا ما فيه من كفر ومغالطة وتناقض حسب ما يقولون. ويعتبر هذا الكتاب خلاصة للفكر اليهودي المتشبع بالروح الفلسفية والعلمية كما عرفه المسلمون. فكتاب دلالة الحائرين هو كتاب تشريعي، ولكن في نفس الوقت ذو نفس فلسفي عميق. إذا رجعنا إلى الاهتمام الفلسفي عموما نجد أن هناك اهتمامين أساسيين. الاهتمام الأول ينصب على علاقة المسلمين واليهود والفلاسفة بأرسطو مباشرة، وأرسطو كما تعلمون هو المعلم الأول وصاحب يعني النسق الطبيعي الكبير وكتاب الميتافيزيقا الكبير أيضا تعرفونه. فكان هذا الاتجاه، وهناك اتجاه آخر وهو اتجاه أفلاطون. أفلاطون تم الاهتمام أكثر بجمهورية أفلاطون، بكتاب الجمهورية وكتاب القوانين، وهو من آخر الكتب التي ألفها أفلاطون. كتاب القوانين من حسناته أن أبا نصر الفارابي الذي كان ابن ميمون أيضا مولعا به ويصرح بأنه تتلمذ على كتبه، هذا الكتاب وضع له الفارابي ملخص وهو تلخيص نوميس أفلاطون. هذا الكتاب الجمهورية مع تلخيص نوميس أفلاطون هو أقرب إلى روح الشرائع. هذا الكتاب درسه ابن رشد في كتابه جوامع سياسة أفلاطون، واستبطنه ابن ميمون في كتابه دلالة الحائرين. فنجد أن التأثير الأفلاطوني عبر الفارابي عبر الرشدي موجود في كتاب دلالة الحائرين. لا نجد عند ابن ميمون تأملات ميتافيزيقية، نجد اهتماما بالطب وله كتابات طبية جيدة واهتمام بالشريعة، لأن الهم الأكبر كان هو كيف نجعل الشريعة موافقة للعقل. وهذا هو لب الحديث ابن ميمون في دلالة الحائرين. طبعا ابن رشد كان صيته معروف في الأندلس وكبير، لم يذكر تلاقي بين ابن ميمون وابن رشد، لا نعرف هل التقيا أم لا. يعني ابن رشد يكبر ابن ميمون ب9 سنين، ولكن قراءة دلالة الحائرين تثبت البصمات القوية لكتابين أساسيين لابن رشد، وهو كتاب فصل المقال فيما بين الحكمة والشريعة من الاتصال، وكتاب مناهج الأدلة. كتاب دلالة الحائرين يعني الحيرة. معنى الحيرة هي نوع من التردد والاضطراب الذي يجده الإنسان عندما يقرأ نصوص الكتاب المقدس، كان كتابا إسلاميا القرآن الكريم أو كان التوراة والتلمود. هذه الكتب تثير في ظاهرها بعض الإشكالات. كيف نحل هذه الإشكالات؟ كيف نرفع الحيرة الواقعة في الشريعة؟ هذا هو السؤال الذي طرحه ابن رشد في فصل المقال في مناهج الأدلة وطرحه ابن ميمون في كتاب دلائل الحيرة. كيف نرفع الحيرة الواقعة في الشريعة؟ فكان كتاب دلالة الحائرين جواب على هذا السؤال. طبعا هو ابن ميمون في دلالة الحائرين يقف عند نقطتين أساسيتين، يقف عند الأسماء المشتركة والمشككة والمستعارة، ويقف عند الأمثال التي يعج بها الكتاب المقدس، فيحاول أن يبين أن الأمثال الموجودة في الكتاب المقدس هي فقط إشارات ولا تدل على حقيقتها. نجد أيضا أن ابن ميمون في كتاب دلالة الحائرين يعني يستلهم استلهام قوي ابن طفيل في قصته حي بن يقظان، بحيث نجد المنهج الرمزي عند ابن ميمون ظاهرا، ويتحدث عن البروق وعن الأفكار التي تلوح وعن الأمور التي الصوت اوكي. الاثنين اذا ماذا افعل؟ انا ما رايت هذه، ما رايت. طيب، يعني أنا أعطي ملخص الموضوع، لأنني ما أريد أن أثقل عليكم بكلام يعني أكاديمي قوي. ليس أنا يعني وجدت المقام مقام حوار وصداقة مشتركة، وليس مقام حديث أكاديمي جاف. يعني قد نجد أنفسنا يعني فيعني أنا عندما قرأت هذا العلاقة الفريدة بين ابن ميمون وبين ابن رشد، وجدت أن الفكر اليهودي كان له قلب واسع، واستطاع أن يستفيد من ثقافة المسلمين كلها. فاستفادوا من الكندي، واستفادوا من ابن سينا، واستفادوا من الغزالي. بالمناسبة يعني في كل ثقافة نجد من يعارض ابن رشد. ابن رشد عارضه قومه، وعندما عارضوه نفوه. كما أن المسيحيين مع توما الإكويني وألبرت الأكبر عاملوا ابن رشد معاملة غير لائقة. بعض اليهود لم يعجبهم ابن رشد، ولكي يردوا على ابن رشد ترجموا كتب أبي حامد الغزالي، فاهتموا بالغزالي من أجل نقد ابن رشد. فإذا اليهود عاشوا في إطار الثقافة الفلسفة الإسلامية، فأفادوا واستفادوا وأسسوا لصداقة مشتركة نعيشها اليوم جميعا. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لم يلتقي هو الموجود يعني لم تذكر كتب رجال والطبقات أي لقاء بين ابن رشد وابن ميمون. ولد في قرطبة وعاش في قرطبة، لكن لم يذكر لهما لقاء. لكن كتاب فصل المقال ومناهج الأدلة ترجم إلى العبرية في عهد ابن ميمون، قرأهما ابن ميمون واستفاد منهما واستلهمهما في كتابته الأخرى، لكن اللقاء لا يذكر. وشكرا. يعني
شكرا جزيلا دكتور إبراهيم برشاشن. Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim Burshashan from Mohammed bin Zayed University for Humanities. Dr. Ibrahim, he intended to summarize, not to go through the paper as was written. So we have the QR here, and so everyone can get their own copy with the full thing. So he was trying to, thank you very much, because he wants to save some time because we lost an hour earlier. Thank you very much for your generosity. Shukran, Dr. So we're going to go direct to the second session. So we're going to skip any break. So we talk about commonalities in citizenship, the role of impact of Islamic civilization on Jewish philosophy, a look at the joint interaction with Moses bin Maimun as an example by Dr. Haydar Hussein. Harvey, are you ready? The English, only the English slide. And Dr. Haydar will speak in English. طول عمرك. Thanks. حياك. تعال تفضل. حياك. تفضل هذا المايك.
Thank you. حاضر. حاضرين. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Erev Tov Adonim, Adonatai. I hope that we are going to have few minutes because I know everybody is tired and you need a break and we skip the break, so I won't be long. But I'm going to concentrate on two factors. The first factor, that our gathering here, which we are so proud, that's just the very last minute before I come to the stage, I've been introduced by the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, that Sumaya, she is an Emirati girl. She broke the wall and she went and learned Hebrew. كلها دخلوت كاشوت. Every beginning is very difficult. I remember first when I went to study Hebrew in Oxford, they were exempted me because my mark was very high, so there are 3 exams to get a place in Oxford. So I passed there, but sadly my supervisor went to St. Andrews University in Scotland, which is one of the best, of course, in theology, and most of you know. That's the university, just Prince William and Kate, they graduate from them, they got married and made there and so on. And the same of hall of residence we were staying. So Hebrew and Old Testament, it was very rare in the Arab world. First I was a medic student, then English, then I switched to Hebrew, then I did double major, Hebrew and English. And I worked with the BBC 12 years as translator and so on. And we graduated lots of Hebrew students in the Arab world. And we are proud to be as part of the team tonight from Mohammed bin Zayed University for Humanities. And maybe we will be the first university in the area to teach Hebrew and to have a program, postgraduate program. Because the senior management of the university paying special attention to the Hebrew and to the Abrahamic house and so on, and all religious studies. So this is a brief description about the situation, and we are going to go through the lecture of today, which it is not a lecture, this is meant to be a book, which I am working on, and there is a soft copy of both Arabic and English translation with Dr. Ahmed al-Mansouri. We would like to thank him very much for this great event and for the best organization that he is holding, and we are really proud to be here tonight. So I am going to tackle this, paper from 2 sides. The first side is the role and impact of Islamic civilization on Jewish philosophy. A look at the joint interaction, Musa bin Maymun as a model or as an example. Who is Musa bin Maymun? It seems everybody talking about Rambam. But let me tell you, between Moses and Moses, there is no other Musa. Probably this is a proverb from Mishlei, we don't know, or from Shir HaShirim, we don't know. This great man, everybody saying that he doing some miracles. My colleague, the dean of the Beit Yeshiva University, he said from where he can afford the time. A man, he is a Jewish, but he's been loved by Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. But sadly, most historians and thinkers in Europe, which we are proud about it, they talk about human rights and so on and so on. They never mention such things until the 19th century. they start, some scholars, some thinkers start to write about the harmony between the Jews and the Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula or Al-Andalus. When Cordoba was the peak in its golden ages, the Jews, they used to work together with the Muslims there. And who were there? Yehuda Halevi, Suleiman bin Gabirol, those great writers, which is still people, they take certain parts of their studies to do a PhD, and they take 5 years to understand 2 shirim. See how great people those Jewish poets or Jewish thinkers or philosophers and the Muslims they were with there. As my colleague, they talked about Ibn Rushd al-Hafid or Ibn Rushd or al-Ghazali, and we are going to mention certain things quickly here. It says the Middle Ages is considered the golden age of Jewish-Muslim relations. This is the first line. Clear, you know, we can understand the whole page from this. And that's, we are proving it tonight. We are from different continents, different, you know, countries, different background and whatsoever, but still we are. Here, the Middle Ages considered the golden age, while this reality materialized in the 19th century. That's what I'm saying. We didn't hear about this, you know, about it in the 16th century, 17th century, 19th, until the 18th century and the 19th century. So the Muslim states in Andalusia were living in prosperity, bliss, and intellectual freedom. This is very important. When we talk about Rambam, we talk about Ibn Rushd, we are talking about the freedom here, and where these thinkers, they got the freedom to write, they got the freedom to discuss with their counterpart without limitation, without borders. That is, we are talking, you know, about being creativity there, you know. So the creativity established there from the Middle Ages between the Jews and the Muslims. In here, we come to tolerance. Talking about tolerance in United Arab Emirates. It's the first country maybe in the area and the Arab world, Muslim world, they assigned, you know, a ministry for tolerance and coexistence. So that's why we are here tonight as well. In here, if we go back to a certain extent, the trans-religious, I think in the next page, the trans-religious utopia or al-Mamlaka al-Fadila, we couldn't find it anywhere else at that time. When most of the world, they were in dark ages, we can see Cordoba was full of lights, full of canals, you know, with sweet water and fountains. So that made certain philosophers write, even translate from different background, from Aristotle, from Plato, and from all comes together in one pot, is being cooked together, this civilization. And that's why we call it the Golden Ages instead of the Dark Ages. You know, at the time there were Dark Ages, but here tonight we are tackling the Golden Ages. If we can go to medieval Islamic Spain, the bridge between the later antiquity and early modernity, Hinkle mentioned, he said, talking about comparative civilization review in an article, he says what Hinkle, he says, I quoted him here actually, in page 10, I think on, if you go to page 10, please, here, you can see in this article, which is, I think it's great. I think I am going to summarize 3 pages, 4 pages in this paragraph, topic paragraph this is. he says the economic, social, cultural, and demographic changes in Islamic Spain were large and unusual. The country had enormous wealth, very rich the country was, and this was reflected in the period of economic prosperity and prevailed in that period, especially the large number of running shops here, which were thousands, hundreds of perhaps thousand mosques, thousands of canals for running water, and paved and well lit streets, actually. When there is lights in the street, while Europe it was in the dark ages. So that's what the Jews and the Arabs and the Muslims, they built, that great civilization. And mainly we are focusing on Cordoba, of course. There were also amazing technological innovations, the most important of which, for example, was the paper factory in Catavia. Imagine there is a factory, paper mill is a factory for paper. Why they need a paper? That's what Dr. Ahmed showed us, the manuscripts here. Imagine about 1,000 years ago, there is a factory to make paper. Then those scholar philosophers, when they write about Ibn Rushd or Ibn Khaldun or Ibn Majah or Yehuda Halevi, Musa ibn Izra or Sulaiman ibn Gabriel, they need paper. So the Arab invented. There is innovation, creativity there. And here it says, near the coast of Valencia, where paper was used extensively in authoring, publishing, and during codification of intellectual and social activities, public and private events, and in the house of the Caliph, of course. He needs a lot of paper, and in Cordoba in particular. The paper was used within the contents of the huge libraries of Cordoba, which we saw the museum and the rare books here in this house, which we are proud to be in tonight, and which included translations of the rare ancient Greek works that were continuing in Baghdad, where the Andalusians had distinguished contact with all parties to the Islamic countries, and the prestige of Cordoba rose accordingly. Now we talk about Cordoba, Andalusia, and the links between Baghdad as well. And so there were a lot of Jews in Iraq, of course, and they are physicians, doctors, authors. And please let me remind you, the Hebrew grammar, the current Hebrew grammar, wouldn't be existing unless Saadia Gaon and Yafet bin Ali, they created their own school. My colleague talked about the Rabbanite school and the Karaite school. My PhD is on Job, on the book of Job. It's the most complicated and difficult book, as you know. You are scholars. When you talk about Job, people try to avoid Job because it's so complicated, so difficult. Kitab al-Nabi Ayyub. People, they say it's written in ancient Arabic, Aramaic, Syriac, Hebrew, so God knows. But Ish haya mi Aretz Uds. Where is Aretz Uds? We go and dig and found out. So where is Saadia Gaon? Where he did his massive works, like Rambam, when he used to come at midnight and he see patients, of course, freely, without charge. Now, no medical treatment, you can get it free, never. He used to be sometimes fainting from hunger, and he was with Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. You know, he's a great leader, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. When he is in his court, when he finished his duty, probably he was about 18 hours, then he come and inspect patients and so on, and give them treatment, prescription, and so on, until he forgets that he hadn't had any food all day. So that's Rabbeinu Moshe bin Maimun Rambam. So when we talk about a man, he is studied the Islamic thoughts, he read the Islamic books, so Saadia did, his master. Saadia, he said, nobody can translate the Old Testament or the Tanakh or the Mishnah or the Gemara unless you go and study the Arabic grammar. Study Sibawayh. Study Al-Farahidi. Study Ibn Jinni al-grammar. So that's when we see when Yafet bin Ali criticized Saadia, he criticized him through the Arabic grammar. And Saadia did the same. And you know when I am talking about Saadia and Yafet, they are the greatest ever. You know, the Judaism produced. But Rambar is as well, is one of the greatest as well, all the time. That's why we are remember him now, after how many years? Maybe 900 years. So we talked about Musa ibn Maymun. Why? Just like in Arabic, when we talk about Al-Mutanabbi or Al-Buhturi or Ibn Rushd. Can I have the next page, please? Please, page 12. Yes. Of course, Musa bin Maymun, briefly, was born in 1135, as most my friends went through it, and died on 1204. This man was blessed. I think he was born on Easter Day and died and buried in the yeshiva he used to teach his student in. They said his tomb maybe moved to the Holy Land, but more likely he was buried there in Fustat or Cairo. Can we imagine that his name, that shows what we talk about tolerance and coexistence. His name is, if we hear his name and we don't know he's a Jew, we think he's a pure Arab. His name is Musa bin Maymun, or as he was called by Abu Umran, Musa bin Maymun bin Ubaidullah al-Qurtubi. Does it sound he's a Jew? No. But he is actually, but he lives within the Islamic community, the Islamic thoughts, the Islamic writing, the Islamic readings, and so on. And that's what's coexistence, which we talk about, and tolerance. Okay. He is a philosopher, was born in Cordoba, Spain, on the eve of Easter, and in the year 1135, and there are those who attributed the date of his birth to the year or 1138, which 3 years difference, is that no? And died in Egypt on December 12th, 1204. Of course, he is, when we talk about Maimonite, he has his own school in translation when he translates the Tanakh or the Mishnah or the Gemara or the Talmud Habavili or Talmud Yerushalmi, and everybody followed his path, of course. I think no other commentator, about maybe Rashi, Kimchi, they came and translated, but when we compare such great thinker, I think that's come limited. If we go to page 13, please, talking about Dalalat al-Ha'irin, this book is authored and scribed by this great author, and between 1926 and 1934, he published translation. There is a guy, he translated this book, of course, which is many scholars, they translated this great book, but Shlomo Pines, I think French scholar, he put the best translation for Dalalat al-Ha'irin, and my colleague, I think they agree, because there were a lot of bad translation, because some people, they have German background, and they are unfamiliar with the Hebrew terminologies. For example, if you tell them, what is the difference between Talmud Hababili or Talmud Yerushalmi? Not familiar, never been to Babel, and he never been to Jerusalem. So what we are talking about with this guy, he did great translation for Dalalat al-Ha'irin, which is an excellent book, of course. If we go to page 14, please. the Egyptian Jewish community were very strong when, of course, since the early Christianity, you know, and a lot of Geniza books and manuscripts was written there and so on. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of them, they said, being written there or transferred, vice versa. But the Jewish community was very strong. They nominated him as Rosh Hagalut. Rosh Hagalut is mean the greatest scholar outside the land, you know, of Israel. And he is the base reference, or the great imam, as they called him at the time, you know, in the Muslim communities, about Musa ibn Maymun. And when he got the entire Jewish community for decades, can you imagine how great a scholar can? But he is physician, he is mathematician, he's a lawyer, he's a solicitor. He put the law, Sharia, the Torah, you know, he explained the Torah if anybody cannot understand and so on. Anyway, I have maybe 5 minutes to finish, and probably you must excuse me because it's a beautiful, each line you read it, you can discover something else. Like here, we will see in page 15, please. Page 15. Now we are coming to the Hebrew literature, الشفروت Ivrit, which is very beautiful. And Musa bin Maymun was influenced by everyone who wrote in Arabic. By the way, he wrote in Arabic, not in Hebrew. Judeo-Arabic, the guy or the gentleman you talk about, my PhD is in Judeo-Arabic, which is very difficult. You mustn't know Arabic to come to this. But I can write in Hebrew and Arabic and join both. So I can write in Hebrew to my students here. By the way, we teach Hebrew in our university, and we are very proud that we have the two of our students here. Is Marwa and Amal. They are level 3. They can speak Ivrit Modernit, Ivrit Kalla. Marwa, she is taking Hayim Nahmani Bialik, her project, and Solomon bin Gabirol Amal. So next time when you come, you can sit with them and have a chat with them about literature. Now, here, he was influenced and wrote in Arabic or Hebrew Arabic language, which is called Judeo-Arabic, of course. And that's what Yafet and, you know, Saadia Gaon, all the rest, you know, they wrote in that at the time, until he was called Moses bin Maymun, the Muslim of Cordoba. They called him, you are Muslim. Among the most prominent of these prominent philosophers and poets, which he used to refer to, Sulaiman bin Gabirol, who died 1021, and he lived between 1021 to 1058, the Andalusian poet, famous writer, great rabbi and philosopher in the Umayyad state in Andalusia, Musa bin Izra, Yehuda Halevi, Ibrahim ibn Dawood, Musa Narboni, and others great philosophers and poets. After his stay in Morocco, which Fez is a great city with the great Jewish community in there and philosophers, he moved to Fustat and Egypt and lived there and wrote most of his work. His writing on ethics and philosophy, he wrote on al-akhlaq wal-falsafa, وكتبوا عنه كثير يعني. They wrote a lot about ethics and philosophy, and I think Raymond Weiss and Charles Butterworth, they are the best writer. They wrote about this, and they wrote about Dalalat al-Ha'irin as well. And the last page, 17, please, if we can come to conclude and end. And if you have any question, we have 5 minutes for any question or so. And we are going to see the writing of Maimonides were characteristic by those religious, philosophical, and theological foundation, and perhaps Aristotle's theology and philosophy also had a significant impact on most of his writing. The same applies to writing of Al-Farabi, which he died 950. Ibn Sina died in 1037, and Abu Hamid al-Ghazali died 1111, as well as Ibn Rushd, who died 1198, where their philosophical writings had the greatest impact on the production of Musa bin Maymun and his philosophical sciences. His death, Musa bin Maymun died on December 1204, in the Hebrew year 4965 in Egypt, or in Fustat in Egypt. It is believed that he was buried in Beit Midrash, in the courtyard of the synagogue in which his students were studying. May God please this man, because he served humanity. Anybody serve humanity, that's a blessing from God, whatever the religion could be. Thank you very much. Thank you for this beautiful community. Thanks again, and thanks to Mr. Ahmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to our dear Dr. Haider. I don't know, how do you guys feel? You know, every session or every topic, it shows that, you know, during that time, it's so resemblant to our time right now. So, you know, it seems that, you know, we are really going in the right direction. So, now to talk about, again, global society, a cosmopolitan history of Jewish-Muslim encounter by Dr. Ronnie Pareles, Director of the Schneider Program for International Affairs at Yeshiva University. Dr. Pareles, please come join us.
Yeah, the slides, yes, wonderful, thank you. Perfect. Good evening. It's really an honor to be here. You hear me? Yeah, okay, now we do. It's really an honor to be here. There's been many thanks given, and you can never do enough, so I'm going to do it again. I want to thank His Excellency Ahmed al-Mansour for creating this space. What an incredible space for gathering. And I want to thank my colleagues tonight, my partners in this endeavor from Mohammed bin Zayed University of the Humanities, who came together sharing different perspectives on similar issues, and it's really a delight. And I want to thank all of you, because I know that it's not easy. People are busy, people have jobs. It's not easy to come out in the middle of the week for some enlightenment, for sharing of ideas. I, at Yeshiva University, I have two primary roles. I am the director of the Schneider Program for International Affairs, which is dedicated to building bridges across cultures, across borders, and for providing opportunities for our students to engage with the world, to deepen their understanding of the complexities of our society and how we're interconnected. And for that reason, I could think of no better way to do that than to bring some of our students with us so that in person they could see really this very fascinating society that is unfolding here in the Emirates. To see it in person, not just read about it, not just hear about it, but to actually be here, to see it, to notice all the details of your community here, and to actually meet people. Those students who are studying Hebrew were able to speak Hebrew with our students, and I'm getting a little teary. It was really a very special moment to see that ways that humanity can overcome these barriers that often politics and history can often create. So I just feel very thankful right now. And my other role is the professor of Sephardic Studies. I focus on the history and the culture of those Jews who, that Jewish community, that Jewish culture, which came out of the interaction with the encounter with the world of Islam. And this is a Judaism which we need now. I go backwards, I'm a historian, so I think about the past, but we need this Judaism. We need a Judaism which is open, which interacts, which absorbs and offers and translates, as we're going to hear tonight, and can mediate. So I think often of an image that Carlo Ginzburg, the great scholar of the Inquisition, uses to talk about history. In Carlo Ginzburg, he says, history is not a mirror, but perhaps history is a broken mirror. That sounds not so good, right? A broken mirror? I don't know. It doesn't sound, but when you think about it in a broken mirror, it doesn't reflect exactly back to you. What it does is allow you to see enough of yourself and realize, I'm not exactly living in Al-Andalus. I'm not exactly living in Baghdad in the House of Wisdom. I'm not exactly living under Salah al-Din in Fustat. But I'm living at a time that I could take these models, I can take these patterns and apply them in my own way. And again, as someone who teaches history day in and day out, in both at Stern College and at our men's school in Manhattan, I hope one day you guys will visit us in Manhattan. I can't promise you this weather. This is kind of magical weather. But I can promise you people who are warm and welcoming and curious and will be very happy to have you. But what I do in those classes is try to give my students a sense of those tools, of those models, how they can apply it in their own way. That's up to them. And thank God they're much more creative and much more driven than I am. So that's that. So tonight we're going to talk about a global society. We've been talking about a global society, of course. We didn't plan it this way, but everyone's talks are interconnected. And I can assure you, I'm not reading all this. I'm not reading it all. I wrote this so I don't have to read it. And we're going to see, and I'm going to shorten my conversation tonight so that we have time for, we still have one more talk, and we want time for food and for conversation. So I'll get to it. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, next. Okay. So here's a map of the expansion of Islam from its earliest stage. And it's important to look at this. One of the things that I think about when I look at this map, when I think about those early centuries of Islam, is how incredibly quick Islam spread east and west. Within 100 years, you're at the Pyrenees and almost at the Ganges, right? So we're from Persia all the way through Spain. That's a very, very quick expansion. Now, not everyone in this world becomes Muslim, because the wisdom of the conquerors was to know that you do not force religion on people. People will come to it if they see the light, if that's their path. Now, they created a two-tier system which does not resemble modern notions of democracy and equality. This is very important, I think. We like to look at the past and say, oh, look, it was a paradise, it was a utopia. That was a system that worked then, and today we have our own challenges and how to figure those questions out, questions of equality, which weren't the questions back then. But what they did create was something unique and very, very special. And the system of according to non-Muslims tolerance and the protection of their bodies, protection of their property, and protection of their sacred right to practice their religion in the way that they need to practice it was fundamental, and it was universal. So what it meant is that from Al-Andalus to Persia, non-Muslims knew that if they followed the rules, as long as they didn't build their synagogue or their church too tall, as long as they didn't take positions of power over Muslims, as long as they didn't ridicule, of course, the ruling religion, and paid their taxes, which was very, very important to the rulers, it was a very smart move, they would be protected, they would be free to engage in any field endeavor that they're interested in. Whatever business, whatever craft. Now, there were certain crafts and certain fields that Jews were more often associated with, but it wasn't because they were forced to be there. That had to do with larger socioeconomic realities. So we're dealing with a world where wherever Jews are, they know their status, they know their rights, they know what they can do. And that stability is one of the biggest differences with the Christian world, where the treatment of Jews was also one of tolerance, but it wasn't clear, it wasn't stable, and so it led often to acts of great violence and injustice. And the other pieces, Jews were not alone in not being Muslim. Jews were there along with Christians of many varieties, Coptic, Nestorian, Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, all the different varieties, Zoroastrians. And so it meant that the Jew was not the only other, which was his situation in Christian Europe. There was no other minorities, which led to a very, very precarious situation. So all these things come together. Something else happens, and that's Arabic. So many countries that today are Arab countries were not Arab countries. Morocco was not an Arab country. It was a Berber. It was a place of Berbers. Egypt, what did they speak in Egypt? Variety of languages, Greek, Coptic. In Syria, they spoke Greek and they spoke Aramaic. So wherever you go, these countries that are we think of course they're Arab. They weren't Arab. They became Arab. And they became Arab not only because of Muslims, not only because a Muslim must know Arabic to read the Quran and to pray, as we're hearing tonight, and it's beautiful to hear it, I have to say. And it was because Arabic became the language of power, it was the language of the government, and slowly, as it became the common language, it meant it was the language of commerce, because it meant, again, I can leave Cordoba, I can travel all across North Africa, go to Baghdad, and I can speak Arabic. I can get on a boat in Basra, and I will find people who speak Arabic, right? And there'll be Muslims in other places, and even if they're not fully fluent in it, they know enough. So Arabic becomes this amazingly useful, conducive language that non-Muslims master and absorb. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So this comes actually from our university library, from the rare books collection of our university. This is a fascinating document. This is a translation of it's the Hebrew. This is a piece of Genesis talking about Esau, the son of Isaac, and it talks about how old he was. And it says it in Hebrew, and it says it in Aramaic, which was the first major universal translation. And then it has it in the tafsir of Saadia Gaon, the great Rabbi Saadia that Dr. Haider made mention of. Saadia al-Fayoumi, who was born in Egypt, moves to Baghdad, becomes the great rabbi of the time, the great innovator of the time, and he realized the Jews need to be able to read and understand. They need a translation in the language they're using. Aramaic is already not their main language. And he creates this groundbreaking Judeo-Arabic translation. And you see it all here. This is a translation that Jews in the Arabic world used until today. Yeah, next. Just to give you the sense of the way that the translations, that Arabic became just a central part of life for people. Now here we have a text. Now, is this in Arabic? Do you see any Arabic here? Right, there's a little, but most of this is in Greek. Okay, this is Dioscorides Materia Medica. Okay, copied in Constantinople in 1515. This still exists. It's kind of an amazing thing. This was made for a Byzantine princess, and was preserved in the library in Constantinople. When the Ottoman Turks take over Constantinople and becomes Istanbul, it becomes part of their collection. And so lo and behold, over time, we see some Arabic Arabic words identifying the plants. This is a black raspberry bush, which has all sorts of medicinal value, which I didn't know about. But, and this is included here. Now, why am I talking about this text? It's a Greek text. Why do I care? Because what happened when those Muslim conquerors entered the former Byzantine Empire, and they entered the former Persian Empire, they were aware that these empires had treasure houses of knowledge that they needed if they were going to run a successful empire. They needed the science, they needed the engineering, they needed the medicine of those books. And what happens is a worldwide effort to identify those books and to start translating those books, again, into Arabic. How do you go from Greek to Arabic? You need stages and you need teams. It doesn't happen right away. First of all, if you're translating a book of pharmacology like this, you need someone who knows plants, knows medicine, knows about how taking plants and turning it into medicine, all those things. On top of that, you need language. This book in particular, this was first translated in Baghdad, and that translation got around, but it was not great because if you can't identify the plants, you're not going to know exactly what to use. So this book is copied by Constantine VII, Byzantine emperor, and is sent to Cordoba. And we've been hearing a lot about Cordoba, so I don't have to tell you. But Abd al-Rahman III, the first Umayyad Caliph of Al-Andalus, receives this book as part of a gift from the Byzantine emperor. And to help him use the book, he sends with him a monk who was Greek, but also knew Latin. Okay, but he's going to a Muslim kingdom that speaks Arabic. What's going to happen there? So you need some stages. So there was a team of scholars that worked on this book. Who was in that team? So there was the monk, there was the Jew, Chazdai ibn Shaprut, a doctor, a Jewish doctor who saved the life of the Caliph, and through that started to become a very, very important advisor to the Caliph. He became a diplomat for him, and the monk, Nicholas, and the Jew, Chazdai ibn Shaprut, worked on taking that Greek into Latin, into Arabic. And this book, if you go to the next slide, the next one, sorry. Well, I just gave that summary. So this book, we don't have the original Arabic translation that Chazdai and the monk did. It got lost. But the book did not get lost. And it transferred into Christian Spain. As the Christians in the north took over more and more territory from the Muslims in the south, that knowledge did not disappear. In fact, the Christians at that point realized, we're hungry for what the Arabs have. We need the Arab books. We need those books. We need to bring them into our world. And so eventually this gets translated into Latin and then into Spanish. This is a Spanish version of it with updated pictures. Yeah, one more. Okay, so we're going to go back to Cordoba, and we're going to, because of time, I'm going to end here. But there's much more, many more treasures to look at. So this is Dunash ben Labrat. Dunash was a Berber Jew from Morocco who was a brilliant, brilliant student. And so what his community did is they sent him to study with the most brilliant rabbis of the day. They sent him all the way from the Maghreb, all the way to Baghdad to study with Sa'adia. And there he's exposed to all of those new currents that you were hearing about tonight. Because Al-Rashid in Baghdad set up the House of Wisdom. This was not part of a religious organization. This was not in a monastery as it would be in Christian Europe. It was not in a madrasa. It was not in a Beit Midrash. It was in a neutral space. So Jews, Christians, Muslims could work together on scientific, philosophical, literary projects. And Dunash, this brilliant, kind of quirky guy, sees what's going on there, absorbs those trends in grammar, in linguistics, and in poetry, and says, this can be a tool for us for Hebrew, to revitalize Hebrew. And that's what he did. This is a little epigraph of his. V'gan ednecha yehu sifrei kedoshim, upardescha yehu sifrei aravim. May the holy books be your Garden of Eden, and may the books of the Arabs be your paradise grove. Now, Dunash did something. He took the books of the Arabs, not the Quran, not the Hadith. That is for religious Muslims. But he took the things that they had in common, and he applied them to his own culture. He applied it to Hebrew language, to grammar, to understanding the words of the Bible. And he took it one step further, which was, he said, we've been writing Hebrew poetry in a very, very particular way for a long time. It's time to revitalize it. It's time to go back to the roots. How does he go back to the roots of Hebrew poetry? Through Arabic. Does that make any sense? No. But it does, right? Because of everything we've been saying tonight. He goes back via this revitalized understanding of language, but he also copies the forms of Arabic poetry and says, I could do a ghazal in Hebrew. Why not? And then he goes and he starts writing them for the synagogue, like Hebrew poetry always was. But then he does something else. He says, we can also write poetry. That's not just for the synagogue. We can write poetry in Hebrew that is about friendship, that's about love. It's the type of poetry that you would write a friend about how you're scared of your own death. It's the poetry that you would share at a garden like this with friends, with an oud, maybe some wine, depending on where you are. And this was revolutionary. This transformed Hebrew literature till today. And I look forward seeing the sort of cooperative, transformative work that's going on here in the Emirates. I look forward to seeing more transformations come about through our encounters, through our coming to listen to the other, to appreciate the other on their own terms, and to share our own journeys, to share our own struggles and questions, and to find solutions together. So may we stay in these paradise groves together. And thank you very much. Really.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rani Paracels, for your wonderful presentation. And if I may just request Her Excellency, the Consul General of the State of Israel, just to say a few words, because we have our colleagues from MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed University of Humanity. They have to go back to Abu Dhabi because they have their schools tomorrow and they have it's an examination time. So, and after that, we'll finish the last session, if you don't mind. It's only a few words. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I apologize for being late. So I didn't hear the first presentations. But I want to say a few words of, first of all, I'm happy to be here. Ahmed is a great friend, and he knows how to bring people together, and I think that's this is what this place is all about. And I was listening to Professor Haider and Professor Perellis, and I think that there are two things that I'm taking away from that. Professor Haider spoke about how we were here in this region living together for many, many years, and the most impressive people, philosophers, who actually created the basis of our cultures, when they worked together, they got to great heights. And I listened to Professor Perellis, and the thing I'm taking away from there is that you need dialogue. Because if you want to live together, you need to speak with each other, and you need to speak with each other in your own language. And I'm not talking language-wise the same as we all speak English, but our cultures, as much as they come from the same place, they are different. And we need dialogue in order to know each other's cultures and to understand each other and to create a good friendship, a sustainable one, and a one that will last for many long years. And I think this is what this piece is about. Two parties that don't really know each other, that come from the same roots. I mean, if we go back enough, we see that we all come from the same place, and our culture is very much based on the same values. But I think the brave decision of the leadership here in signing the Abraham Accords and opening the door for dialogue will get us closer together, will make us stronger together, because together we can create great things and accomplish much more than we can do each one in their own home and in their own society. So I'm very happy to be here. I hope this is only a first event in many more, because as long as we keep talking to each other and creating these bridges and friendships by language, by dialogue, by understanding, it will take us further for many, many years. So thank you very much all for coming.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your kind words. And our dear colleagues, our partners, our great friends, and who started this historical place with us from the Mohammed bin Zayed University of Humanity. You are excused if you want to go right now. We really appreciate, because it's an examination time and you have some commitments. Drive safely. Yeah. Thank you very much. Without you, we could not have done this one. Thanks a lot. So, now is the time for the dessert, for the best speech of this session. Now we're going to talk about the influence of Ibn Rushd on the philosophy of Joseph Albo by Dr. Shira Weiss, the Assistant Director of the Rabbi Sachs Center for Leadership and Values at Yeshiva University. Dr. Weiss, most welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation and the honor it is really to be here. I'm the Assistant Director of the Rabbi Sachs Center, the Sachs-Herenstein Center at Yeshiva University. And Rabbi Sachs, the former Chief Rabbi of the UK, put forth tremendous effort in building interfaith relationships and created tremendous impact there. And so at the Sachs-Herenstein Center, we really hope to engage in these types of relationships and joint ventures. In addition to that, I teach Jewish philosophy at the Bernard Revel Graduate School, and I've also had the honor of participating in two different interfaith fellowships through the Templeton Foundation, which brought together Jews, Christians, and Muslims to work on philosophy. And in each of those experiences, I found them extremely enriching in building friendships, in collaborating on scholarship, and really creating partnerships. And this is very much the same, and I look forward to continued years of partnerships together. I want to build upon a couple of the ideas that some of the other presenters touched upon, specifically on the Islamic influence, the philosophical influence on Jewish philosophy, specifically medieval Jewish philosophy. And scholars have debated from medieval to contemporary times whether or not Judaism has dogma, has explicit, obligatory beliefs. Moses Maimonides, who you've heard from in virtually every session this evening, Moses Maimonides popularized Jewish dogma by articulating beliefs that he felt were implied in the Torah in an effort to provide the Jewish community with a universal set of principles so that they could fortify their own faith and defend themselves against those who attacked. So if you look,
Can I change
it doesn't work?
No, it's better.
Okay, thank you. So if you put on the first slide, Maimonides did this in his Perush HaMishnayot, in his commentary on the Mishnah, not in his philosophical work, The Guide of the Perplexed, that was mentioned before. But rather he did it in his Perush Mishnayot, he did it in his commentary on the Mishnah, because he felt that these beliefs were really implied in the Torah, and he related them to three different categories of deniers who were excluded from the world to come. If you just glance at this, I'll go on this side so you can see it. If you just glance at these 13 principles of faith, the first 5 deal with the nature of God. You must believe that the Creator exists, belief in God's unity, his incorporeality, etc. And then the middle 4 deal with prophetic revelation. You believe in the prophet, believe in Moses, believe that the Torah is authentic. And then the last 4 of Maimonides' obligatory beliefs are beliefs that relate to retribution, that God knows what the individual does, and he will reward or punish those who are obedient or those who sin. And he says at the end in the commentary in the Mishnah, when a man believes in all these fundamental principles and faith is thus clarified, he is then a part of that Israel whom we're to love. But he says, if a man gives up any one of these fundamental principles, he's removed himself from the Jewish community. Now, Maimonides takes a pretty strong stance here and includes even somebody who accidentally is led to a belief, even somebody who his philosophy has led him to an error and thereby to denounce or to refute any of these principles. And he does that because of his Aristotelian influence. He believes that the world to come is an intellectual and spiritual plane, and therefore one needs to be theologically prepared by having these beliefs in order to sustain oneself in the afterlife. Now, Maimonides' popularization of these dogma inspired a lot of other enumerations by later Jewish philosophers. If you look at the next slide, it motivated a whole genre of Jewish philosophy that's known as the principles of the Torah. So we see different enumerations by Simon ben Semach Duran, by Chasdai Kreskas, by Yosef Albo, by Abraham Bibago, by Isaac Abravanel. And each of them create a different system of beliefs, a different hierarchy, a different number, and a different nature in terms of which ones are in fact obligatory. Now, the most popular of and the most accessible of all of these different systems of dogma is that of Joseph Albo, who lived in the 15th century, and he wrote the Sefer Karim, the Book of Principles. And Albo was not only a Jewish philosopher in the 15th century, a particularly hostile time in Spain, but he also was a political figure. He was the defendant of the Talmud, in the Tortosa disputation. So he led both a rabbinic leadership role as well as a political role. Now he explains, as a result of participating in the Tortosa disputation and seeing the lack of uniformity of beliefs among the other scholars that also defended the Talmud, as well as his own community not having the same uniform beliefs, he explicitly states his objective, if you go to the next slide, in his Book of Principles. And he says the point of writing this hierarchy of dogma is to provide an explication of dogma to meet the needs of Albo's persecuted co-religionists and to popularize Jewish dogma within a universal context in order to fortify Judaism against future attacks. So he doesn't just state the principles of Judaism, but first he states the principles of divine law in general, and then shows the authenticity of Judaism as it corresponds to divine law. If you go to the next slide, Albo explains 3 principles. As opposed to Maimonides' 13, he gives 3 principles. And he says here, it seems to me that the general and essential principles, not just of Judaism, but of divine law, are three: existence of God, providence and reward and punishment, and divine revelation. Almost a compact form of the three kind of categories of Maimonides' 13 Ikarim. But not only does he state that there are three principles of divine law, he then goes on and creates a hierarchy of shorashim, obligatory derivative principles, and then anafim, branches that are particular to Judaism. And so examples of it are implicit in every one of these are subordinate derivative principles. From the existence of God is derived God's eternity, perpetuity, and so on, God's knowledge, prophecy, and so on. And from providence follows physical reward and punishment. So there's a whole hierarchy which Albo tries to explain. These are the principles, the obligatory principles of Judaism. Now, many Jewish philosophers, contemporary Jewish philosophers, scholars, if you go to the next slide, question whether or not Albo is really responsible, even though he popularized it. And some attribute that really Albo was influenced by his contemporary, Shimon ben Semach Duran, because he also, in two works that were both published before Albo's 13 Ikarim, before Albo's Sefer Ikarim, he published two works, the Magen Avot and here you see, of the same three principles: revelation, reward and punishment, and God's existence. And so Duran, some scholars argue, is really responsible for the three Karim, and Albo was influenced by him. However, it's not clear in contemporary Jewish philosophical scholarship if, in fact, that's true, because Albo wrote his first treatise of his four-treatise work prior to Duran's, and he only then elaborated in the next three treatises on each of those three Ikarim, and therefore completed his work after. So scholars are debating whether or not Albo is really responsible or if he was influenced by Duran. But even if he was influenced by Duran, Duran is not necessarily responsible for its originality. In fact, Albo's three Ikarim can be traced back much earlier to that of Ibn Rushd, Averroes, who we've been talking about a number of times today. Have a look at the next slide. Even though Averroes doesn't articulate these in terms of dogma, Averroes claims that that three truths, and we're going to see his text in 1 minute, though he doesn't identify them as dogma, were inherent in every revealed religion and are universally binding. We'll see the text in a second. But whereas Duran does not talk about universal divine law, he only focuses on these three principles of Judaism, Averroes writes it in the same way about universal divine law as we see Albo later does. And not only that, there's another distinction between Averroes and Duran that seems to have influenced Albo. Averroes not only influenced Duran and Albo's delineation of the three principles, but their distinction between the denials of principles of religion and denials of other beliefs. While philosophical investigation is permissible, if, when you philosophize, it leads you to some erroneous denial of a Torah belief, one is not considered a heretic. But if you deny one of the principles of religion, one is considered a heretic. So if you go to the next slide, we can see Averroes' idea in its own text. And Averroes, in the Decisive Treatise, in the 12th century, and the Decisive Treatise was his argument about the value of philosophy in Islam, Averroes, in his discussion of the excusability of error in allegorical interpretation of Scripture, says the following: error which is not excused to any person whatever, and which is unbelief, meaning expulsion from the Islamic community, if it concerns the principle of religion, or heresy if it concerns something subordinate to the principles, meaning not involving expulsion. This error is that which occurs about matters, knowledge of which is provided by all the different methods of indication, so that knowledge of the matter in question is in this way possible for everyone. Examples are acknowledgement of God, of the prophetic missions, and happiness and misery in the next life. For these three principles are attainable by the three classes of indication, by which everyone without exception can come to assent to what he is obliged to know. So whoever denies such a thing, when it is one of the principles of the law, is an unbeliever who persists in defiance with his tongue, though not with his heart, or neglects to expose himself to learning the indication of its truth. So Averroes explains the same three ikarim that we later see in Albo in similar terms. And with regard to heresy, even if it's not deliberate, even if one denies when not intending to deny, he still seems to be, according to Averroes, a heretic. Now, Duran, who we just saw earlier, takes a different stance with regard to accidental heresy. Duran says, yes, one is a heretic if one deliberately denies one of the principles, but one is not a heretic if one mistakenly or accidentally is led to a wrong belief. Now, Albo, with regard to this question, is a little bit unclear. He talks about heresy in 3 different references and seems to contradict himself. In one reference, he argues that the investigation of fundamental beliefs is extremely dangerous, for anyone who denies one of the particular principles of a law is excluded from the group identified with that law. So he seems to take a stance similar to Maimonides. And in another reference, he says that there's an obligation to accept all the derivative principles without qualifying any exceptions for anyone, right, including those who unknowingly are led to erroneous conceptions. But in a third reference, he articulates similar to Duran, that yes, if somebody deliberately denies any of the principles, you're considered a heretic. But if you're accidentally led by philosophical speculation, you're not considered a heretic, you're considered a sinner, you need to repent, but you wouldn't be excluded from the community of Israel. Now, contemporary Jewish philosophers debate what, in fact, Albo's real approach is with regard to accidental heresy. So some argue that Albo maybe cites the stricter Maimonides Averroes approach because he thinks that that's what refers to deliberate heresy, but he's more lenient with regard to accidental heretics like Duran. But others argue that maybe he really does in fact agree with Maimonides and Averroes, just like we saw Averroes' influence with regard to his 3 principles. And maybe he's just citing the alternative of more lenient approach because he doesn't want to imply that some of his predecessors or contemporaries like Duran would be considered heretics because they don't agree with his view. Regardless of such a debate, what is clear is the profound influence that Islamic philosophy, and especially Averroes' philosophy, had upon the medieval discussion of Jewish dogma. And this discussion continues to be contested today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Shifra, for your contribution. And as I said, what we are seeing here today is like, same reflection of the, we talk about reviving history. We are reviving history in this country right now. I think also in the Middle East, this increased the hope for both of our nations when we hear such, speeches and enlightening from experts, professors, who they know what they're talking. It was very beautiful dialogue. Very civilized, sometimes little debate, but what all reflects that we can revive the old cultures that we are here in the United Arab Emirates try to revive, the culture and the values of tolerance, the values of respect each other, accepting one another, and how can we really reach a level of synergy in a way that we can move forward. Thank you very much for our great speakers. We are very honored. Honestly, it was so enlightening, and any of you would like to share their slides or the papers with others, please give us the permission so we can share with others. We're more than happy if you want to do that. Secondly, I would like to thank Yeshiva University, for initiating this thought and for approaching me for that. And I would like to thank also Mohammed bin Zayed University of Humanity for really being, supportive from the first moment. They liked the idea. They said we are in, and everything went smooth. Maybe because of the timing, tomorrow we have the Independence Day of Israel, the celebration, and then because of the weather, nobody expects going to be, so natural sauna here. But, even my papers are melting. So that's why maybe, and the traffic, because it was a bad day because of there's big exhibition coming on the Sheikh Zayed Road, and the traffic was very bad. So many people, they came very late, and we accept your apologies. You don't have to apologize. Thank you very much for being here, and I would like to thank our team, my colleagues, who really, they do their best to be the best hosts for everyone. And we're so honored, even people who made last minute, some special guests, the Consul General of Israel, the Vice Consul of the United States, our friend Nikolai, all of, no, it's okay, I'm not picking on you. I'm very happy that you made it. It's good that you guys are here. And I would like to thank every single person who came from Abu Dhabi, from different Emirates, and from far away, like, Riva and Mark and Huda, and it really means a lot for us. And hopefully we'll see you again in our next series of such events, because we believe that such events are very important to move forward. And we are creating new language. The beauty about the language, the words can be very simple for others, can be more complicated, but we are creating a platform for dialogue. And we're going to continue to do that. And we're going to continue to do that with your help and, with our great culture, which is, of the country, the openness that allows us to do this. I think, we are very grateful for the leadership for, providing us such platform and support. Thank you very much. And please enjoy the dinner. Mark, I give you one hat, I got another one. Okay. Group picture, if anybody wants to join, we'll take group pictures. About the food, this side is the kosher food, and this side is the non-kosher food. So on the right side, where you see the cousins smiling, that's the kosher one. When you see the tents, all the time, that's the non-kosher. So let's take it like as a policy. So the shortest stay down, always, and the tallest go back. So if you see a person shorter than you, stay in the back. If you are shorter than the person in front of you, go in front of the person. Yeah, please join us, all of you. Join us. If someone taller than you, go in front of the person. Yeah. We'll be done. Okay. Could you please just join us, all of us? Yeah. Everyone join us. Jean, Mila, Mossad, Dana, just for a photo, please. Nikolai, everyone. Mohammed, you can be in the top, because you're the tallest person, you can be in the back there. Make it two line. So if you think someone taller than you in front of you, just feel free to just go in front of the person.